Hello and welcome to Devil's Advocate. How serious is the situation facing the Indian economy? That's the key question I shall put today to the government's chief economic advisor, Kaushik Basu. Dr. Basu, the economy today faces stubbornly high inflation, declining growth, a fiscal deficit target that many believe you won't meet, an FDI which slumped last year and may not rise again. How serious is the situation?
There is concern for the Indian economy, but it's a short-run concern. However, the short run not handled correctly can spill over into the long run. I don't really think that there are any serious concerns about the long run, but there are problems in the short run which we need to handle.
Let's go through each of these concerns one by one, and let's begin by talking about inflation and growth. Now, on Tuesday, you said that the RBI should reconsider its policy of tackling inflation by raising interest rates, and in fact, referring to Turkey and Brazil, you even said that they should consider the possibility of cutting interest rates. 3 days later, on Friday, the RBI increased interest rates for the 12th time in 18 months. How do you respond to that?
The advice that I had given just a couple of days ago was that RBI should consider thinking outside of the box, and inside of the box is raising interest rate. So I was urging RBI to look at the slew of policies available. That's one of the pieces of advice among the many that go out. And I feel really it is good in India that you can air different views, but in the end it is RBI's decision. They've got a big research team, very responsible body. It is true that they've decided finally to raise interest rates by 25 basis points.
I want very much to explore the advice you gave the RBI. Before I do that, let me put this to you. One of the consequences if you're giving them advice publicly is that it's become clear that there is a sharp difference between the Ministry of Finance, whose chief economic advisor you are, and the RBI over how to tackle inflation and how to view falling growth. Is that difference a matter of concern?
That difference is a matter of no concern. Let me clarify. I feel in an open society, you do want interesting ideas to be brought on the plate. And I feel India is open enough that India can take this. There are different views that you want to take on, but we are all very clear that this decision is to be taken by the Reserve Bank of India, and we think it is a very, very responsible body, but we do want to give interesting ideas to the
Except
Reserve
for the
Bank.
fact that it's now clear that the Finance Ministry thinks differently to the RBI on a subject that matters critically to people, inflation. That worries people sometimes. How do you reassure them this is not a matter of concern?
If it was the case that there was one clear opinion which is correct, then yes, a difference of opinion is of concern and worry. But we know in economic policy making, unlike in an engineering problem, there isn't a black and a white about these things. And I actually like it, the fact that India is an open enough polity that it can take different ideas on board and then come to a decision on a particular one.
Now there, in fact, you touched on something that matters to people, that there is no clear-cut way of tackling inflation. At the moment, headline inflation is 9.78. It's for 9 months been above 9%, and it's the highest it's been for 13 months. And yet, as you say, the government doesn't have a clear solution to the problem. The truth is, it's grappling and looking for solutions. Can you today accept that the government is still grappling for an answer?
This one is, I agree with you, that we don't have a clear answer. But Karan, again, we need to be, it is important to understand that when there isn't a clear answer anywhere in the world, emerging economies are all inflating, it's a new world we are encountering. To have the pretense of a clear answer, pretense of a clear policy where that is not there, is much more damaging than being open about it and saying that we are experimenting, we are trying with different policies, and we have held it at a moderate level for some time. It hasn't gone out of control. And Karan, I have to put in one more point. Compared to the history of inflations, this is bad, but nowhere near what many industrialized countries have seen and many other countries have seen.
Except for the fact that the RBI has persisted with one policy for 18 months, 12 times it's raised interest rates. And will you accept that the RBI has not only failed to reduce inflation, but in the process of raising inflation, it's damaged growth?
See, the second part of this policy, that it has slowed down growth, is something that even RBI expected. RBI has made that statement that we are battling inflation. In the short run, it will dampen growth. That does not come as a surprise. What does worry us is that this policy has not had enough bite on inflation. But this is again a changed new world we are living in. Vietnam, Argentina, China, we are all grappling with this problem.
Except for the fact that Indians turn around and say they failed to tackle inflation, And in the process, they've created a new problem that didn't exist before. We now have declining growth. So we've ended up with two problems rather than one.
You know, that growth problem, we should not solely put it down to the tightening of credit. The global situation, by the way, the second quarter of this year compared to the first quarter, of the 10 G20 countries on which we have data, 9 of them it's slowed down. So there is a global slowdown
Except that
going
on growth, our growth in the first quarter was the worst if you look at the last 6 quarters collectively. I'll come to growth in a moment's time.
Yes.
But inflation is the first concern because it affects every Indian. You've suggested to the RBI that they should think out of the box. You suggested that they should take a leaf out of Turkey and Brazil and reduce interest rates as a way of tackling inflation. Why do you believe that will work?
I believe that that is something that ought to be considered. Usually when you have interest rate, the standard central bank response or a government's response is you raise interest rate. And my view was what you just pointed to. We've done it. It's having some impact, but not at the level at which we were expecting.
So try something different.
So try something different on which we are beginning to get some evidence from other countries. So it's not plucking things out of thin air.
But once again, this is a sign. But once again, this is a sign that we really don't know what will work, and so we're trying different things in the hope that one of them will work.
Karan, in a domain of policy making where there isn't a clear-cut solution, to pretend and give the impression to the people we know and we will do X, that's much more dangerous than saying that, look, we are in a new world where many countries are facing this problem. We have to try around different policies because we don't want to damage India's growth story, which, with all its problems, I know you'll come back to this, remains in terms of global comparison phenomenal.
I'll come to that in a moment's time. But in the meantime, the RBI has not only not heeded your advice, they've done the opposite of what you've suggested. They've raised interest rates yet again. So as Chief Economic Advisor, what trajectory do you see for inflation over the next 6 months?
First of all, I mean, Reserve Bank of India is the authority that decides on this. We give different ideas, it takes a decision. I'm absolutely fine with that. Now, inflation expectations. My expectation is that it's going to remain choppy and difficult till about December. The month of December should see a distinct drop in inflation.
Isn't that only because the base rate effect will kick in? Last year, December was so high that this year in comparison will look low. That's technical rather than real.
There are two things. Yes, the base rate effect helps. It's technical, but that's the way we compute inflation. Also, both the fiscal and monetary policy, both of them have huge lags. And our calculation is that with these lags, these policies will begin to kick in, which we have taken measures towards the end of this year.
When will inflation come down to levels of 6 and 5%, where the government is comfortable and where the ordinary people don't feel the pain?
Not till the middle of 2012, unfortunately.
Not for another 8 months?
Not for another 8 months, Karan. That's a bit of bad news, I think, but we should not veer from the target. I, for instance, believe that we must not settle into saying that 7% is fine. We have to bring it down to less than 5%.
But the truth is that it won't come down to 5% till the summer of 2012.
Not till April, May, unfortunately. I don't think it will come down. If you
Can you be certain it will happen by even then? Because Finance Ministry officials, yourself in particular, have been predicting that inflation will come down to 6 for about the last 18 months. It hasn't happened. Is this another such prediction?
It's possible it'll go wrong, Karan. This is economic policy into the future. Again, I don't want to be foolishly confident and say it's guaranteed, but it is very, very likely that it'll begin to fall from December. It will go down, but not before April, May will it reach 5%.
All right, we know that we don't have good news on the inflation horizon. Let's now come to growth. Q1 saw growth slip to 7.7%. The worst in the last 6 quarters. I've already said that.
Yes.
In July, industrial output slipped to just 3.3%, the worst in the last 21 months. This is not just sliding growth. People say this is slumping growth. Would you accept that?
On this, no, I don't accept that. 3.3 is 1 month industrial sector growth. Overall, the figure that you pointed to, 7.7%, may be bad in comparison to what we've done in the past. But any global comparison, 7.7% is just wonderful performance in this global scenario.
But you're taking comfort from the fact that others are doing worse than us. That's no reassurance that we're doing well.
Well, 7.7% is good by any standards, excepting our own previous
Very
couple
poor
of
if your
years.
target is 9% and the Prime Minister keeps talking about wanting to kick it up to 10%. We're nowhere near that.
Yeah, no, we have missed our target. We were aiming for a bigger growth. It's down. But even with down, when you're among the world's top 10 performers, there is some consolation.
You keep
in that
looking
one.
for consolation, and the consolation comes from the fact that others are worse off than us. Let me put this to you. What do you expect will be the overall GDP growth this year? When the finance minister presented his budget, he said 8.5%. Since then, the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council and the RBI have reduced it to 8%. Deutsche Bank is now talking of just 7%. What do you, as Chief Economic Advisor, believe will be the actual achievement?
It's a very volatile situation, difficult to make a forecast. I've got some back-of-the-envelope calculations. I expect the year to end at 8.1%
8.1%
GDP growth, yes.
Will you put your neck on the line for that figure?
Not quite my neck on the line, but I think 8.1 with a small range around that is a reasonable forecast. The first 2 quarters will be bad, the second 2 quarters will be good, and I expect it to be roughly there.
To what extent will the continuing, if not worsening, crisis in the Eurozone and the uncertainty in America undermine that 8.1 prediction?
If the Eurozone crisis becomes a recession, which is not impossible, then my 8.1% will go, I'm afraid.
So there are huge question marks over 8.1.
There is a question mark with Europe in where it is. But if Europe remains on the brink and does not go down, which is the most standard expectation on Europe, 8.1%
What's
for
the
us.
bottom that it could fall to, that growth figure? What's the bottom?
I don't know. I mean,
Deutsche Bank, I'm going to interrupt,
yes.
said 7% of Europe slides to recession. Would you accept that's realistic?
I don't think so. If Europe slides to recession, next year will be worse because these things come in with a lag. But this year, we won't go anywhere near that to 7%.
All right, let's take a break on that point. When I come back, I want to talk to you about the consequences of high inflation, declining growth, and specifically ask you, can we meet the fiscal deficit target? And what about FDI? Will that recover or will that continue to slide? All of that in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to Devil's Advocate and an exclusive interview with the government's Chief Economic Advisor, Kaushik Basu. Dr. Basu, let's come to the consequences of sliding growth. Many people believe it will have a fairly important damaging effect on the government's revenue expectations. Secondly, in this climate, no one believes you're going to make your 40,000 disinvestment target. Are you worried about the fiscal situation?
The fiscal targets will be difficult, but the fiscal targets are still very achievable.
But are they really achievable? Because in quarter one, if you annualize the fiscal deficit, it was touching 7.8%. Can you therefore, at the end of the year, achieve a target of 4.5% when your revenue will come down and your disinvestment is unlikely to be met?
But the numbers that we are getting as of yesterday on direct taxes and a variety of other taxes, we are not actually doing too badly. The disinvestment is a source of some worry. But if we can match it with certain fiscal reforms which are on the cards, then the target, difficult, no doubt about that, but a target that we have set for ourselves, 4.6%, we should get pretty close to that.
Well, when you say pretty close, are you saying 5% or closer?
No. It should be much closer than that. So I can't give you a number, but we won't breach 5%.
So you're saying you may miss 4.6, but you'll be under 5?
We will be under 5. We are determined and we want to keep it there.
A second major concern is foreign direct investment. Last year, it came down by 25%. UN figures suggest it came down by 30%. Earlier this year, you were hopeful that it might pick up. But now, with the economic crisis in Europe and uncertainty in America, how confident are you that FDI will return to anything like the levels you're comfortable with?
FDI, usually these deals get struck well in advance. So the numbers that we've already got on the deals that are struck makes me feel that the FDI scenario actually is quite rosy for this year, but could again turn bad if the European situation deteriorates. But this year should see a very, very good rebound of the FDI figure.
So very quickly, the 25% slump of last year will be made up this year?
I would expect that.
But next year, we could see a slump again?
You could see if Europe is in a bad situation.
Let's then come to an issue that most people say the government has lacked the conviction and courage to pursue: reforms. Many people argue that the way to boost growth, the way to curb inflation, is in fact for the government to go ahead with reforms it talks about but doesn't implement. My key question is this: given the political and economic uncertainty, has this government lost the appetite for reform?
Karan, I would like reforms to move faster than the reforms have. But in recent times, there have been small moves in the correct direction. This is a democratic polity. Things slow down. But in terms of where we want to go, I speak to policymakers at the top. I feel what heartens me is that all the key players are pretty clear about the direction in which we go. We have to carry a big polity along with us.
Everyone agrees about the direction. The problem is they don't move in that direction. Let me give you 3 critical tests. First, FDI in retail. In June, you chaired a committee which okayed it. In July, the Committee of Secretaries endorsed it. In August, Anand Sharma told me that he was confident that before the end of the calendar year, FDI in retail would be a reality. But now, the Business Standard has front-page stories saying that in fact it may not happen for 12 months, it may not happen for 18 months, and by then you and I know we'll be into elections, so it may not happen at all. Is it going to happen?
I still think it will happen, but the slowdown is disappointing to me because, as you pointed out, I have for a long time been pushing for it, and it did appear 1 month ago that it's imminent. It now seems slower. I can't deny that.
So you're conceding that it doesn't look likely that it's going to happen quickly?
Actually, no, quickly meaning it won't happen in months, but I think the media report today was more pessimistic than it need have been.
All right. More pessimistic than it might have been, but nonetheless, it's not happening as imminently and as quickly as you thought it would.
Yes, yes.
The second test case, the national manufacturing policy. 2 weeks ago, Anand Sharma told me that the cabinet would okay it and it would become a reality in 2 weeks flat. On Thursday, the cabinet met. It failed to agree. Ministers were in disagreement. Has politics come in the way once again of a major policy reform?
You know, the manufacturing policy reform, even if it is agreed upon, it's going to take time. So actually this slowing down is not really like your multi-product FDI slowing down, because this is not something that is immediately going to lead to a series of actions.
Except that the very initiation hasn't happened.
Initiation has not happened, but you know, there are other moves which to me are sort of concrete moves. As long as that takes place, if we don't have this piece of paper, okay, it's unfortunate.
Except
but
that when things slip, they start sliding.
Yes. But you know, there are little reforms taking place in terms of enabling industry to borrow money, as you've seen.
Very little reforms. Yes. I mean, the other third big package of reforms were reforms like GST, DTC, pension, banking and insurance reforms. All of them are caught up in the Parliamentary Standing Committee. Can the government deliver, or once again, is politics going to intervene?
On DTC, my expectation is that it's going to come in from the 1st of April.
Expectation, or do you think that will actually happen?
That's very likely, very likely. I'll be really taken aback if it does not, but GST is going to be a bit more delayed.
And this is, by the way, the third time it will be delayed.
I agree. GST, it's not good news, but I expect...
So not April 2012?
I don't think it will happen April 2012, but during the course of this year, because it can be brought in the middle of the year, I'm fingers crossed that it's going to come in, and that's an important one.
Fingers crossed gives it away. It's once again a hope.
It is a hope, also an expectation.
What about pension, banking, insurance? They're all locked up in the Parliamentary Committee. Can they be freed?
You know, yes, you saw the Parliament, it slowed down, so I can't give you a very rosy picture of what's coming. But the overall story, I'm going back to what you were talking about. There are strengths in terms of investment, in terms of savings. So the overall story, and in comparison, no doubt, with the world where it stands, the India story does remain very good.
You insist upon seeing the silver lining. My last question, let me concentrate on the dark cloud in between. Inflation stubbornly high, growth slumping. Your fiscal deficit target, most people believe, can't be met, although you think it can, but people would question that. FDI down, you're hoping it'll come up, but we don't know. And the government seems to have lost the will for reform. It's a cloudy horizon.
No, it's not as bad. Inflation is high, but 9 to 10% is bad, but we've seen much worse inflation in many other places, including in India. Growth is a short-term problem we are having for a couple of months. We will pick up. And yes, on FDI, I do think we will do much better. The fiscal is going to be a tough one, but we will make it.
Are you disappointed?
No. No.
Dr. Basu, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.